A few days ago, I was passing the church of the Stazio of this day, one of the 7 major basilicas in Rome, referred to as the Church of the Holy Cross, notice in Jerusalem, Santa Croce in Jerusalemme. The reason being that way back, Constantine, with the help of his Holy Mother, Helena, had got hold of, as it were, enough of Jerusalem to bring it over to the heart of Europe. What they did was, through a miracle, they were able to distinguish between these 3 remnants of crosses which had been kept safe by what the Romans had done. They'd made it impossible for Christians to get there, to Calvary, by putting all kinds of debris and blocking it up, which was a blessing in disguise. The only thing was that they couldn't know which of the 3 crosses was the one belonging to the Lord. And so the Lord showed by a miracle which one it was. I believe that somebody had an accident, died, I think, and touching that cross was immediately given new life. So this is the one that came back. But it wasn't just the cross and the relics that went with it, still there. It was also a great amount of earth. And therefore they put this earth in the heart of Rome. And that's why it's called to this day Holy Cross in Jerusalem. And it is the reference to Jerusalem that we have right through liturgy of this day. St. Paul talks at length about Jerusalem. We have the beginning of the Mass, which gives the name to the Sunday, Laetare Jerusalem, and on it goes. But then we have what actually happened at Calvary, which opens the heavenly Jerusalem for us. Now, this Gospel and this epistle have been chosen for a reason on this 4th Sunday of Lent, from time immemorial. It's because the one indicates the healing that comes to us from Calvary through the sacrament of penance, and the other, the life-giving bread of angels that is given to us in the Eucharist. This multiplication is a foretaste of what we're doing here. Now I want to zoom in to the forgiveness of sins. Before I get there, I just want to make a little parenthesis. Providence works in strange ways, and a tiny part of that cross in Santa Croce has come to me, and I have it in my 2nd tabernacle, because of my link with the Cistercians there who had the house until recently. Now it's been given to the Diocese of Rome, which was there for centuries under the Cistercians. And if one has it close to one, one senses this is a splinter of what brought redemption to the whole cosmos. It's actually quite powerful. And we know of its power from exorcism, because the devil can't bear it. There's been a testimony of that from a bishop who was threatening the demon with it. Don't use that! It's got his blood on it. But also, in that place which is full of ancient relics, we have the very title, the titulum, which was on the head of the Lord, in 3 languages, and because the Hebrew starts there and goes there, the Greek and the Latin do the same. So we read the Greek and the Latin the wrong way around, because they correspond to what is starting first, the Hebrew. As it happens, last week I was in what had been until recently one of their monasteries, Cistercian monastery up near our own monastery on the Monte Amiata, helping. But there, as I celebrated yesterday, actually in the old rite, it hit me. I am here just over the 8th century crypt. That's 7 something. the church, the monastery, was built after an apparition. Rakis, the king was there, and the Lord appeared as the Saviour. And from then on, that place is called Abbadia San Salvatore, the Abbey of the Saviour. And over that place, and the very place is known where it happened, there is this ancient and well-restored crypt. And I was celebrating just on top of it, in the old rite, and it hit me. Here, time is standing still. All these monks that have gone before have done the same thing with the same words. Just before I came away, after hearing many confessions in the course of the week, I sat again in the oldest of the confession boxes in the Abbey Church, still in use. And the date was on it, 1696, chiselled on the top. And as I sat there, I thought and I actually felt a something of the healing still lingering in the air. I could, as it were, feel the power of the heavenly touch that had from that same seat in the confessional reached head after head of invisible penitent on the other side of the veil, because they're classical in their construction, you can't see the face. And I just thought, this is our church, this is our faith, yes, this is Calvary, and the grace of Calvary touches anew every head that comes close. And then, as we went, because we were 5 priests going around, a huge blitz of the whole area, as they do in Italy, we touch every possible soul we can, going into all the houses, apartments, bars, even clinics, dentist rooms, everything. And because it's part of the life, they all accept it. Very few say no, and they do a great spring cleaning, because you go into their bedrooms and everything. And then some will ask you for confession, but many will say, what happened since you were there last year? And the tears start to flow. And then the surprises come too. You find quite a few from the east of Europe as people looking after elderly people. And I was very moved by some of the testimonies coming even from there, e.g. one, a Romanian lady called Rodica, that means rose. And she was just quite familiar with what happens in a Christian land, even though she was Eastern Orthodox, and took it on board quite happily. And then she went into mode and into tears, and she came out with what had happened in her family. How her own father had suddenly got very ill and died on the spot, without being able to say goodbye or go to confession. She knew the importance of it. And then her brother, about the same week or so, also started to be on the brink. And he also died that very week, but she got him to go to confession. And she said in Italian, with this strong accent from Romania, "This was the greatest present I could give, confession before they died." And I thought, this is beautiful. This is our huge Christian family across the world. There's more uniting us with our Eastern brethren than divides us, because when it comes to the last, grace is what matters. Saving grace is what matters. And that grace we have in common with them. And by the way, this year we have again Easter on the same day. It happens once every 5 years or so, because ours is so late this year. So this is the power of Calvary coming through. But then also many other things hit me. I was reading recently the exhortation which our Holy Father has given us, Amoris Laetitia, and I did notice how he had this powerful phrase which hit me. We are here in, I read it in Italian, it comes through in English as this, the hospital of a battlefield. In other words, we're handling morsels of souls. Here, souls between life and death, between heaven and hell, and we do our best in the trenches of our parishes. In other words, one gets as far as possible to the soul and uses what works. It might be only at that point point a human contact, but that might melt the heart. And as I went round, I thought and I saw this actually is humanity and divine grace intertwined. In some cases, the old people can't do an awful lot, but some things get through. The human warmth, the human touch, and they know somehow what's happening. And it gets through to their deepest level. Warmth, human and divine. And by the way, old Nick knows it, and he's trying his best to make sure that this individual contact doesn't happen. All he wants is to have parish priests behind desks. The last thing he wants to see is them next to a soul physically, especially in confession. Now, when it comes to confession, he's having a field day. I just remind you of the teaching of the Church with regard to this sacrament. Here we have a teaching of the Catechism quite clearly underlined. The liturgical celebration of God's forgiveness of the sins of the penitent, who is thus reconciled with God and with the Church. This is the sacrament of penance. By the way, we had a very beautiful celebration in the ambit of the 24 hours for the Lord, which the Holy Father wants in the middle of Lent every year. All these confessions happening before the Blessed Sacrament exposed way into the heart of the night. It's very healing, confession at night. Lots of priests healing, lots of calm confessions of all ages. That's the real thing. And much happens in the heart of night. So, reconciled with God and with the Church. One can't separate the two. The acts of the penitent, notice, contrition, the confession of sins. Now, one is not forgiven for what one doesn't confess. Remember that. Therefore, it's simply not valid to go to a priest and say, I'm sorry. One has to have matter. And satisfaction or reparation. One has to do one's penance. One time, the Curé of Ars was confessing a person, and he said this, doing things, did you always do your sacramental penances? And the penitent remembered, I didn't actually. Now, it's important. These sacramental penances are symbolic, but they have to be done, and they have to be done with contrition of heart. And as soon as possible after absolution, not pushed on the back burner. Together with the prayer of absolution by the priest. These constitute the essential elements of the sacrament of penance. There are several formerly in the East, actually, in the East now, they have the same sacrament, of course, and they all have in common, however, one very beautiful part of the ceremony. The priest places his stole over the penitent, and they're both under the mantle of the mercy of God. What happens when a person can't, at the last, receive absolution? Essentially, what is happening in the case of the sacrament itself, at the deepest level, is able to happen there too if there is no priest. Insofar as what matters is the will. Now, the will has to be, at that point, in a yes mode. Now, a lot of souls at that point will actually get there when they see what's happening. They see that they're dying, and somehow grace is given, and they see their whole life, and in one flash, they're able to make some kind of act of contrition, at least minimal. Now, it's not the best way to go, but the Lord does his best. And it would seem that every soul is given a chance. Even in a state of comatosis, in coma, the soul may actually, and it would seem that that is the case, something that we can't see could be going on. There's a borderline of a few seconds, a few minutes perhaps, up to 2 or 3, in which there is placed before the eyes of that soul going into eternity the real issue. So we only leave them to the mercy of God. But as Catholics, we have to make sure that we do all in our power to get a priest there. Only a priest can do it. And by the way, old Nick is having another field day with this with regard to the communion of the sick. Because it's not enough just to send the Blessed Sacrament out from the altar with lay people. It's not enough. It can actually be a help, but it's not enough. And it's being taken as a cop-out by many a parish. One has to have now and again the priest, because absolution is very, very important. Don't think that people have got to a certain age, have got to a state of confirmation and grace where they don't sin anymore. Old people do sin. So I'll just cite this as an example of what can happen in the mystery and mercy of God when the priest cannot be found. Remember now, it could be our case, an accident, a sudden death. This happened in the First World War. This comes from a French source. So, this person was sent with 5 men to reconnoitre in a wood. This is in the first person, so I'll cite it. It's even more powerful. We came across a Ulan officer with 2 men who were dismounted, studying a map by the light of an electric lamp. We charged them with a bayonet. The 2 men were killed and the officer severely wounded. I went to him and found him a handsome figure of a man with a face like marble. Lying in a pool of his own blood, he murmured words of which, though I could not understand at first, I gradually gathered the meaning. He said that he was a Pole and a Catholic. Remember the 10,000 officers of the Polish army shot with a bullet in the back of the head and put in a massive ditch at Katyn and Smolensk. My brother's father-in-law would have been one of them, had not the nurse in the military hospital said, "Don't listen to him, don't listen to him, he's delirious." They were looking for officers, and all the rest were taken and shot. He died the other month after having a second chance, and I was able to anoint him. So he said that he was a Pole and a Catholic, and tried to pull from his pocket his rosary and an image of Our Lady and the infant Jesus. At this sight, all my fury died down, and having placed my men at their posts, I went back to him and made him understand that I too was a Catholic, and that my greatest desire was to comfort his last moments. Remember now, these are enemies. He seemed to understand and lifted up his rosary. Seeing what he wanted, I recited a decade, and he answered feebly and more feebly in German. After which, he raised the beads to his lips and kissed them several times. Then he handed them to me, and I also kissed them. This seemed to please him. Then I had to go back to my men, so I put his rosary and image in his hands and left him. Next morning, on my way back to the trenches, I found him lying dead, just as I had left him. The old confessional. How many sins
have crossed this little grill that stands aloft alone 'tween heaven and hell. How oft was blood that on this cross lies still, shed on a gaping chasm, ere a knell o'er blasted aeons rang. How oft did he through these weak pores soft pass and cancel all that could the demons sate in damned glee at what was not revoked in moments small. Great elegance is not in this wee box that holds the skies at large, yet charged is this, each splinter and each crack, and all hell rocks with irritation strong at swindled bliss, that had no right to be, that should not be, for such dry rot dries not eternity. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus, remember me when you come into